The first sound she remembered was the sharp crack of glass breaking somewhere in the dark. It wasn't loud enough to be accidental. It was deliberate, controlled, like someone wanted her to know they were here. Her breath caught in her throat, her body instinctively curling in on itself in the shadowed corner of the damp room. She didn't move. She didn't call out. She just listened, her heart pounding so violently that it drowned out the distant hum of the city beyond the cracked walls. Her fingers grazed the small scar on her wrist, a mark she'd stopped trying to hide. It was the only part of her that told the truth without words. She pressed her palm over it, grounding herself. Whoever had entered the building wasn't here by mistake. And that meant she wasn't safe anymore. For days, she had been invisible. A shadow slipping between alleys, sleeping in abandoned stairwells, wrapping herself in the quiet anonymity of places no one wanted to look at. But invisibility was fragile. It could shatter with a single wrong step, or with one man deciding he had the right to find her. The footsteps drew closer, measured, unhurried. Whoever it was knew the power of silence. She closed her eyes. If they saw her, it would be over. Not the kind of over people talk about in casual sentences, but the kind that meant there would be no chance to start again, no chance to undo the years of running. Then, a pause, and a voice. Low, deliberate, steady in a way that didn't fit the sharp tension in the air. "You're not safe here." She opened her eyes. A tall figure stood in the half-light spilling through the broken window. His coat was worn at the edges, the fabric fraying like it had been left in rain too many times. His face was shadowed, but his stance was unthreatening still. It held a weight that came from someone who knew danger intimately. Her throat was dry. "Who are you?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he scanned the room, as if memorizing every possible exit before stepping closer. The faint glint of an old wristwatch caught the dim light, a model far too expensive for someone in clothes that looked this worn. "Someone who's seen what happens when people like him get what they want," he said finally, his voice almost reluctant. "You can come with me, or you can stay here, but if you stay, he will find you." She didn't ask who he was. She didn't have to. The shadow of that man's presence had followed her through every street, every night. Her instincts screamed at her to run from both of them, this stranger and the one who hunted her. But something in his tone, a quiet exhaustion laced with certainty, made her hesitate. This was not a man bluffing for control. This was a man who already knew what fear cost. She stood slowly, her legs trembling from both the cold and the weight of the choice. "If you try to hurt me, you can leave," he interrupted, calm. Any time, the lie would have been easy to spot. But he wasn't lying, and that scared her even more. They moved quickly through the back streets. He didn't touch her, didn't ask questions, just kept walking a few paces ahead, scanning for signs of danger like a man who had lived a lifetime in security. When they finally stopped, it was in front of an old warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Its doors sagged from years of neglect, but the lock was new. He unlocked it in silence and pushed it open, revealing a space far warmer than its exterior promised. Inside, there was a single bed in the corner, a table with two mismatched chairs, shelves stacked with canned food, and a wood stove that filled the room with a faint trace of smoke. It wasn't much, but to her, it looked like a fortress. "It's safe," he said simply, closing the door behind them. "No one comes here." She stood near the entrance, uncertain. "Why are you helping me?" His jaw tightened, and he pulled off his coat, revealing a shirt whose fabric was clean but threadbare. He moved with the controlled precision of someone who had once been used to tailored suits, expensive rooms, and people stepping aside when he entered. That kind of posture didn't just appear, it was carved into a person by a certain kind of life. "Because once," he said quietly, "someone saved me. And I didn't deserve it either." She frowned, the words catching her off guard. "You talk like you lost everything." "I didn't lose it," he corrected. "I walked away." But the world doesn't forgive men who stop playing their game. She watched him, noting the subtle signs, a scar along his jaw, a faint tremor in his left hand, eyes that had seen boardrooms and back alleys alike. Whoever he had been before, it was someone powerful, someone who'd had a name that carried weight. But now he was here, alone. Over the next days, they settled into a rhythm. He didn't push her to tell her story, but she caught him studying her sometimes, as though piecing together a puzzle without the box image to guide him. She learned that his name was Daniel, just Daniel, no last name offered. And she learned that he cooked in silence, read worn books at night, and always kept the door bolted twice. She didn't tell him that the man hunting her wasn't just some stranger, but someone who once promised to protect her. She didn't say his name out loud anymore. Names had power, and she couldn't bear to feel his in her mouth again. But she started to notice the small ways Daniel protected her without asking, switching sides with her when they walked, so he was always between her and the street, stepping outside first in the morning to check the road, leaving the last portion of food for her even when he thought she wasn't looking. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was deliberate, safe. And then, one night, as the wind rattled the thin walls, she asked the question that had been pressing against her chest since that first night. "Who were you before this?" He didn't look up from the stove. A man who thought money could keep the world in order. And now, finally, he turned, meeting her eyes. A man who knows it can't, but safety was never permanent. One morning, she woke to find him standing by the window, unmoving, his jaw set. "What is it?" she asked, her voice still heavy with sleep. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was low. "We've been found." Her chest tightened, as if an invisible hand had wrapped around it. The air in the warehouse felt suddenly too heavy, too thick to breathe. "How do you know?" she whispered. Daniel's eyes didn't leave the street. Black sedan, tinted windows, parked where no one parks unless they're waiting. His voice was clipped, stripped of anything but the bare facts. "They've been there since before dawn." She stepped closer, careful not to make noise on the old floorboards. The faint glimmer of the car was visible between the gaps in the boarded window still. Silent, a predator pretending to be part of the scenery. "Is it him?" Her voice cracked on the last word. Daniel didn't answer immediately. "If it isn't, they want you to think it is. Either way, we don't wait for them to knock." Her pulse was racing. Every muscle screamed for her to run, but her legs felt heavy. She forced herself to focus on him instead. "What do we do?" He turned, his movements controlled but faster now. "Pack what you can carry in 30 seconds. No more." She didn't question him. She grabbed her bag, the one that never really left her reach, and stuffed in what little she had, 2 changes of clothes, a small notebook, the photo she never looked at but couldn't throw away. Daniel moved like a man who had rehearsed this moment before. He slid a thin folder into his coat pocket, threw a canvas bag over his shoulder, and checked the small revolver he kept hidden under the bed. "We're not going out the front," he said, leading her to a side door she hadn't noticed before. It opened into an alley so narrow, she had to turn sideways to get through. The cold air bit at her face. "Where are we going?" she asked, trying to match his pace. "Somewhere they won't follow. At least, not right away." The streets they took weren't streets at all, just the forgotten spaces between buildings. Paths only people who'd spent years walking them would know. They moved quickly, but without panic, each step chosen with precision. Finally, after what felt like hours, they stopped in front of a small, decaying brick building. The sign above the door was faded beyond recognition. Daniel unlocked the door with a key that looked like it belonged to another century. Inside, the air was thick with dust, but the space was layered with something else quiet. The kind of quiet that had walls, that protected. This was an old security office, he said, setting his bag down. No one's used it in over a decade. No power in the grid records, no listed owner. She set her bag down, still catching her breath. How do you even know about places like this? For a moment, his eyes darkened not with anger, but with the shadow of old memories. Because I built some of them. Back when I thought you could make a city safer by knowing where to hide in it. Hours passed before either of them spoke again. Daniel sat at a small desk, his fingers drumming a slow, restless rhythm. She watched him from the corner, the weight of the silence pressing on her. Finally, she said, "You didn't have to do this for me." He looked up. "I did. Why? You barely know me." His expression shifted something between frustration and sadness. "You're not the first person I've had to get out. But I couldn't save the last one." The air between them changed. She didn't push for details, but she felt them there sharp, unspoken, sitting heavy on his shoulders. "Who was it?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "Someone I failed. That's all that matters." That night, as they lay on opposite sides of the room, she found herself staring at the ceiling, the question circling in her mind. How had a man like him, a man who clearly once had wealth, power, and control, ended up here, hiding with someone like her? It wasn't until the wind outside picked up, rattling the old door, that he spoke again. "I used to run security for one of the biggest corporate empires in the city," he said into the dark. "Private contracts, executive protection, high-stakes negotiations. I saw the way power worked, how it rotted people from the inside out, and I was good at it. Too good." She turned her head toward him. "What happened?" "They asked me to protect someone who didn't want to be protected," he said. His voice was steady, but there was something raw under the surface. She was a whistleblower. She had proof of things that would have brought down half the boardroom. They wanted her kept quiet one way or another. Her chest tightened. "And you?" "I got her out," he said. "Or I thought I did." 2 weeks later, she was found. His voice broke, just enough to betray the years he'd carried it. "After that, I walked away." But walking away doesn't erase your name from the list of people they want to keep in reach. The next morning, they ate in silence, but the air between them felt different. There was a shared understanding. Now both of them carrying ghosts. They didn't invite, but couldn't forget. By afternoon, Daniel was gone for an hour, slipping out without saying where. When he returned, he carried a small bag and a look she didn't like. "What is it?" she asked. "They know you're with me now," he said simply. "That changes things." Her stomach dropped. "Changes how? They won't just be looking for you. They'll come for both of us." He set the bag on the table. Inside was a prepaid phone, a burner. "We move again tonight." But when night came, they didn't move. The sound of an engine idling outside froze them both in place. Daniel crossed to the window, lifting the edge of the curtain just enough to see. His jaw clenched. "They're here." This time, there was no hesitation in his voice. He reached for the revolver, checked the cylinder, and met her eyes. "You trust me?" She didn't even think before answering. "Yes." "Then stay behind me." They waited until the footsteps came slow, deliberate, just like that first night. Daniel's stance was solid, controlled, but his breathing had changed. A knock, not loud, not impatient, just enough to let them know it wasn't going away. And then a voice, one she hadn't heard in months, but still recognized instantly. "You can't hide forever." Her blood turned cold. Daniel's grip on the revolver tightened, but his voice was calm. "Yes, she can." The silence after his words was heavier than the wind outside. For a moment, it seemed like the man beyond the door might simply walk away, dissolving into the night and taking the threat with him. But she knew better. This wasn't someone who left empty-handed. The voice came again, smooth and venomous. "She's mine. You think you can erase that?" She felt the weight of the years in those words, the ownership he'd always tried to brand into her, never with love, never with care, only with control. Her hand trembled at her side, nails digging into her palm. Daniel didn't flinch. "You're trespassing." A short, mocking laugh answered him. "And you're interfering. I know who you are, Daniel. I know what you've done. You really think hiding in rotting buildings makes you untouchable?" Daniel's expression didn't change, but she caught the smallest shift in his shoulders, a readiness, like he was counting steps in his mind. "You've got two choices," he said evenly. "Walk away now, or I make you." "Make me?" The voice sharpened. "You're not the man you used to be." Daniel's tone dropped lower, steady as stone. "I'm worse." The knock came again, harder this time. A signal. Outside, she heard the faint crunch of boots on gravel more than one pair. Daniel's eyes flicked to hers, and in that split second, she understood. This wasn't a confrontation they could win by force. He motioned silently toward the back. She hesitated. Leaving him here felt wrong, but his look was clear. Go. Her breath caught as she moved, each step toward the rear door heavier than the last. She had almost reached it when she heard the first crash, the sound of the front door splintering under weight. Voices barked orders, low and controlled. She froze, torn between running and turning back. Daniel's voice cut through the chaos. Not a step further. The next moments blurred into a storm of noise. Boots against the floor. The metallic click of the revolver's hammer. A sudden silence that was sharper than sound itself. Then Daniel's voice again, cold as steel. "She leaves, or no one does." Her chest tightened. He was bargaining with himself on the line, and she knew men like the one outside didn't bargain, they took. And yet, there was a pause. Long enough for her to slip through the back door into the dark alley. Her hands were shaking so hard, she could barely keep her balance as she stumbled into the night. She didn't run far. She hid behind the shell of an old delivery truck, forcing herself to stay still, despite every instinct screaming at her to go. Through the thin veil of shadow, she could see the faint outline of the building's front. The standoff lasted minutes that felt like hours. Then, the sound of retreating steps. A car door closing, the low rumble of an engine pulling away. Her breath hitched as the silence returned. She stepped out slowly, scanning the street. The black sedan was gone. Daniel emerged from the doorway a moment later, revolver still in hand, eyes sweeping the darkness. When he spotted her, his expression softened, just barely. "They'll be back," he said quietly. "And next time they won't talk first." They didn't go back inside. Instead, they moved again, this time deeper into the city's forgotten underlayers. Daniel led her through narrow tunnels beneath the old train lines, past rusted gates and walls, tagged with the faded marks of people who had once used them as shelter. Finally, they stopped in a space barely large enough for them both to sit. The air was stale, but here, the world above felt miles away. She was shaking now, the adrenaline wearing off. "You could have been killed." Daniel's gaze was steady. "So could you. Why are you doing this?" Her voice cracked under the weight of the question. "I'm not worth." "Stop." His tone was sharp, cutting through her words. "Don't tell me what you're worth. You don't see it yet, but you will." They sat in the quiet for a long time, the only sound the distant drip of water somewhere in the tunnels. Slowly, the tension in her chest began to loosen, not because they were safe, but because he was here. When he finally spoke again, his voice was softer. "You remind me of her." She looked at him, unsure if he meant the whistleblower he had failed to protect. "She was brave in ways she didn't even see," he continued. "Thought she was running for her life. didn't realize she was running toward it. Her eyes burned, not just from exhaustion, but from the echo of something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Fragile, dangerous, but alive. Over the next days, they stayed hidden in the tunnels, emerging only at night to find food. Daniel's movements were slower now, his shoulders heavier. She noticed the way his hand sometimes pressed to his side, as if guarding an injury he wouldn't admit. One evening, as they shared the last can of soup, she said quietly, "You're hurt." "I've been hurt before," he replied. "That's not an answer." He gave her a faint smile, tired but real. Neither was the question. It was on the fifth night that they heard it again, the sound of footsteps in the tunnels. These weren't random wanderers. They were deliberate, slow, the sound of someone who knew exactly where they were going. Daniel stood, revolver in hand, and looked at her. "This ends tonight." Fear rose in her throat. "What does that mean?" "It means we stop running." The figure that emerged from the shadows was exactly who she feared, the man who had hunted her for months. His suit was immaculate, his smile cold. "You've cost me a lot of time," he said, his eyes sliding past her to Daniel. "And you always interfering in things that don't concern you." Daniel stepped forward, his voice like stone. "She's not yours." "She never was." The man's smile widened. "Everything is mine, Daniel. You should know that better than anyone." Something in Daniel's face shifted in not anger, but clarity. "Not anymore." The man's eyes narrowed, his smile tightening into something colder. "You think one gun changes the outcome?" He asked. "You're outnumbered. You're out of time." Daniel's voice didn't waver. "You mistake me for someone who's trying to win." A flicker of confusion crossed the man's face, just enough for Daniel to step closer. "I'm not here for victory," Daniel said. "I'm here to end it." And I'm willing to take the cost. The tension in the tunnel thickened. She could feel it in her bones, the moment where words were about to break, where action would take over. She wanted to scream, to run, to stop both men from whatever was about to happen, but her body felt rooted to the damp concrete floor. "You won't pull that trigger," the man taunted. "Not with her watching. You still think you can be the hero." Daniel's gaze stayed locked, steady as if the world around them didn't exist. "I'm not a hero. I'm a man who won't let you touch her again." The man's smirk faltered. It happened fast. A lunge. A shot. The echo slammed against the tunnel walls, swallowing all other sound. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the man staggered back, his expression twisting with shock. He wasn't dead, but he was bleeding. The wound was enough to take the certainty out of his posture. Behind him, the shadows shifted, and she realized he hadn't been lying about being outnumbered. 2 others were with him, but neither stepped forward now. Daniel kept the revolver steady. "You take him out of here," he said to the others. "And you tell anyone who comes after her what happened to you tonight." For a moment, she thought they would fight. But then, with a hissed curse, they pulled the wounded man back into the shadows. Their footsteps faded into the darkness. When it was over, Daniel lowered the gun, his shoulders sinking with exhaustion. She crossed the space between them without thinking, her hands finding his arm. "You're bleeding," she said. "Not as much as he is," he muttered, but his voice was faint. The adrenaline was wearing off, and with it, the strength holding him upright. They made it back to their small corner of the tunnels, and she forced him to sit. In the dim light, she saw the gash along his ribs deep, but not fatal. She tore strips from her shirt to bind it, her hands shaking not from fear, but from the knowledge that he had stood between her and the man who would have destroyed her life. "Why?" she asked again, her voice barely a whisper. "Why risk this much for me?" His gaze met hers, tired but unwavering. "Because no one did for me when I needed it. Because I'm tired of letting the wrong people win." They stayed hidden for days after, moving only when necessary. The air between them had changed. There was no longer the distance of strangers. There was a bond forged in survival, in the choice to protect when it would have been easier to walk away. One night, as the faint hum of the city seeped through the cracks above them, she said, "You could go back, you know, to your old life." Daniel shook his head. "That life's gone. And even if it wasn't, I wouldn't take it." "What would you take?" His eyes softened in a way she rarely saw. "A place where no one has to run." It was spring when they finally left the tunnels for good. They traveled miles from the city, past the reach of the people who had hunted them both. In a small town by the water, they found a weathered house no one had lived in for years. The roof leaked, the floors groaned, the windows rattled in the wind, but it was theirs. The days fell into a rhythm. Fixing the broken pieces of the house became a kind of ritual, replacing glass, patching leaks, sanding wood until it shone again. Every nail hammered, every wall painted, was a quiet rebellion against the lives they had left behind. Sometimes, in the evenings, Daniel would sit on the porch with an old book, the light catching in his hair as the sun went down. She would watch him and think about how different he looked here, still carrying the weight of his past, but no longer consumed by it. Other times, she would catch him watching her instead, as if making sure she was really here, really safe. Months passed. The memories didn't fade, not completely. There were still nights when she woke with the echo of footsteps in her mind, or when Daniel's eyes went distant, caught in a moment only he could see. But there were also mornings when she woke to the smell of coffee, to the sound of the waves, to the knowledge that no one was coming for them anymore. One evening, as the last light disappeared behind the horizon, she said quietly, "I think I'm ready to stop running." Daniel looked at her for a long moment before nodding. "Then we build something worth staying for." She smiled small, but real. Together? His answer was simple. Always. They didn't erase the past. They didn't pretend the scars weren't there. But in that weathered house by the water, they learned something neither of them had been taught before. Safety wasn't the absence of danger. It was the presence of someone who would stand in front of it with you. And that, they both knew, was worth any cost.